how the Kenyan government has described the headlines coming out of its trip to China, accusing the Kenyan media of manufacturing reports that the administration was denied funds to extend the SGR line to Malaba. But who's taking who for a ride on the railway? Hear what State House and the media have to say on the matter on Presspass tonight. But first, here's what you have to look forward to.
President Uhuru Kenyatta is expected at the Second Belt and Road Initiative Forum in Beijing.
Shock report on debt, even as Uhuru goes for more.
Did the media miss the train in reporting that the government was denied funding for the Naivasha-Malaba stretch of the SGR?
Pesa iko Kenya, pesa haiko nje.
Tungependa kupata public participation. Tuambiwe tumeenda China.
The man on the street tells us who between Kenya and China he thinks is the greater beneficiary of the relationship. Now, with me in studio to take this conversation forward are Temesi Mukani. He is the Deputy Director for Messaging and Press Relations, or is it Presspass Relations? Also with him is Rose Lukalo Owino, a Media Policy Specialist. And next to her, on her right, is Edwin Okoth, a business writer with the Daily Nation. And also joining our panel, he's last, but he's definitely not least, is Dr. Charles Nzai, who lectures on development economics, project planning, monitoring and evaluation, among other subjects at the Kenyatta University. Prior to that, he worked in government for over 10 years in the supply chain departments of various ministries, a background that should definitely come in handy as we take our conversation on the SGR forward. We will also be speaking to Rosaline Obala, who co-authored one of the articles that informs our discussion tonight. But before we get into the nitty-gritty, let's first hear what Kenyans have to say on the Kenya-China relationship.
Uhusiano kuhusu China na Kenya ni uhusiano mzuri, hatujakataa. Lakini imefika wakati whereby lazima kama ni white ikuwe white na kama ni black ifanye nini? Ikuwe black. Si ndivyo? Hii faida hii loan ambayo tunachukua already, naona wananchi tafadhali, wananchi already wanaumia.
Tungependa kupata public participation. Tuambiwe tumeenda China, tunaenda kuleta pesa na inafanya mradi huu na tutafurahia kama wa Kenya.
Nataka kushtumu hizi mainchi za ngambo au wa China au wazungu ya kwamba hawa ndio wanasaidia viongozi wetu wa Kenya kwa njia ya corruption.
Watu wakiomba kitu kiende kwa kitu fulani iende direct. Wache hii mifuko mingi katikati ambayo inatuletea hasara, hatuwezi kuomba tena na hatuwezi kurudisha. Tutaanza kwenda maheg kwa mambo ya economy ya vitu tulioomba.
Itaendelea, lakini siku ambayo tutakosa kulipa loan, hapo ndio sasa relationship yetu ya China na Kenya ndio itakatika.
Kazi imekuja kwa wa China, wanapewa barabara watengeneze, lakini wanaleta watu wao wenyewe. Unapata watu vijana hata hawalipwi vizuri, hawana kazi. Sasa tunaona ni kama tunaongezewa burden.
Pesa iko Kenya, pesa haiko nje. Hii ya kuomba ni kutanganya, inakuja kuombea wale watakuja iba tena.
I've not used SGR, but I believe traders are getting good returns when it comes, their containers are getting to Nairobi in time.
According to the project of the government project, the SGR project, to me is viable and is good.
Hii issue na SGR naona ni kama imetuletea gharama kubwa kwa nchi, kwa sababu I hope tunadaiwa sasa hivi, Kenya inadaiwa cause ya SGR.
Now, the question that we asked them was, yes, who between Kenya and China do they think is the greater beneficiary of that relationship? And I'd like to throw that question first to Temesi. What's your assessment of those views that Kenyans have voiced? A majority of them seem to believe that China is the greater beneficiary.
Thank you, Oli, for having me on set tonight. I think it's a pleasure that we are getting an opportunity to respond to some of the conversations that have been going on among Kenyans. And I'm happy that Kenyans are speaking the way they are speaking. You can see it's mixed. There are people who say it's good for the economy, it's good for them. It's making movement of cargo from the port to Nairobi, as it is right now, and it's making ease of doing business. I don't want to repeat what my bosses spoke yesterday in the statement that was released by the Chief of Staff, but I would want to remind Kenyans that we don't just borrow for the sake of borrowing. We borrow because we have to invest. And I'm happy that Kenyans now have a brand new railway line, courtesy of the relationship that we enjoy with China and many other projects, really. The focus, and as CS Monica said in her tweet last time, is that Kenya and China enjoy a broader and bigger relationship that has given Kenya an opportunity to own probably the best infrastructure in this part of Africa. So basically, it's Kenyans who are benefiting from all this, and you just don't wake up one morning and say you're borrowing. We borrow to invest in infrastructure, and Kenyans can attest to it.
Okay. Dr. Nzai, I want to come to you next. Do you think within the press and in the media circles, do you think there's some undue focus on matters debt where the Kenya-China relationship is concerned?
First of all, thank you for inviting me to this forum, just like the Belt and Road Forum, which ended last week in China. I think the sentiments, the concerns of the people are varied, as Temesi said, that the country is taking too much debt, isn't it? That Chinese are benefiting. These are the same concerns that were even raised in the forum last week in China. But I think they were addressed by the Chinese government. So
do you think there is some undue focus on that debt as far as the media reports are concerned? Are we always just reporting on the SGR and the debt surrounding the SGR?
I think there's undue focus on the debt issue. That Kenya is now entering a crisis as far as debt management is concerned. I think we are not there yet. I think it's too early. It's too premature for us to mention, to say that.
Okay.
Of course, our external, professionally, the issue is external debt is not good for any country. And big external debt. Big in quotes.
But are you saying that we are creating undue alarm? Let me throw it now to
for now, we are creating undue alarm for no reason.
Are we obsessed, Edwin, with the SGR and the debt surrounding the SGR as the media?
Even if we were obsessed, we should be obsessed, because this is debt and we are borrowing heavily. And if you listen to what those people are saying there, one lady there said, we want to be involved. We want to be told what's going on. There's another sentiment you had there that, you know, let what is white be white and what is black be black. That tells you one thing: there's a lot of secrecy and misinformation or lack of information. And when you see us obsessed, we are only trying to dig deep into where the information is.
Okay, and actually what you're saying echoes what Rosalyn Obala and I spoke about a bit earlier, but we will have her on phone in a few moments. Rose, what's your opinion?
No, I mean, even in your own circumstances, you monitor your debt, you know. You don't just take on debt in your house and not worry about whether it's too much or where you're going. And the conversation must be had. I agree, half of the conversation is just steered by lack of information, you know. And I think it's one of the biggest failings of government is communication, not just on this issue, on all issues. The SGR has many, many components. The issue of quality of the line was raised, never addressed, never discussed. The issue of cost, you know, in terms of its not affordability per se, but just is it value for money, you know, never addressed. And the issue of need, did we need it in the first place over what we had, was never addressed. So it's almost like it's been rammed down Kenyans' throats with a debt that they have to pay and no explanation. I mean, of course you expect backlash.
Okay, see Temesi taking down some notes, but why don't we look at the headlines that caused all, I don't want to call it an uproar, but caused the government to come out and address the issue. There is the Saturday Nation. The headline that rain was why China rejected Uhuru loan request. Almost similar to what ran on the Standard, and that is Uhuru Raila return minus SGR billions. Now let's look at what the government had to say. We'll start with the Foreign Affairs CS Monica Juma. Well, she said strange headlines coming out of Nairobi today. The relationship between Kenya and China is broader than the SGR, which is, I think, the point that was made by the economist on board. In fact, the SGR extension beyond Naivasha was never a priority agenda for the current mission to Beijing. Now, let's take a look at what the Chief of Staff, Nzioka Waita, had to say. He said it is very disappointing to read excerpts from a number of newspapers, namely the Saturday Nation and the Saturday Standard, both papers intimating that the Republic of Kenya, as represented by His Excellency President Uhuru Kenyatta, has failed to secure loans or funds, that is in quotes, for the extension of the standard gauge railway from Naivasha to Kisumu. He continues to say that it goes without saying that these headlines are not only factually incorrect, they're misleading and extremely damaging to the reputation of the people and the government of the Republic of Kenya. Temesi, I'll come to you now.
Yeah.
Like I said, one major issue that has come up with regard to this Belt and Road Forum, the second Belt and Road Forum, is that there was very little communication coming out of State House. Do you think that's a fair comment?
Please allow me first of all to talk about those headlines, because when I saw those headlines and I was in Beijing, I saw a media that is lost touch with the foundations of journalism. I'll tell you why. Any journalist who's ever sat on an international desk knows very well that the Belt and Road Forum was a multilateral forum, bringing together 60 heads of state and government. And so when you have a multilateral meeting, you have very little time for governments to engage. Okay? So basically you cannot have a negotiation the size of the SGR and agree that you will be given money in a bag and come back with it to Nairobi. So anyone saying that the president was denied a loan or something, first of all needs to understand how the international world works. And I think that's the same thing that the Chief of Staff was alluding to yesterday, that it's a process really. And so when we saw those headlines, we thought they were actually misleading, and I'm glad that that was brought to the attention of the media houses through that statement that we issued. Number two, the other reason why I think as a media, and for those of us who operate in this space, confirms the fears that we've been having for a very long time, that we as journalists are not taking time and space and the opportunity to get information. Okay? I'll tell you this. I was in China, I came back this morning, and I was leading a press team, okay, that had journalists from some of these media houses. And if you look at their reportage, whatever they reported and what was covered, you see these stories that are hitting headlines were done in Nairobi. They were not done in Beijing. So it beats logic really. Why would you give the president's team a press corps to go with you to Beijing? This is a team that has access to the president, has access to the diary. They are briefed by the CSS and they are briefed by us on what to expect the following day and a review of what was discussed during the day. And then when I look at the bylines, I see people who are seated in Nairobi. And I think as a media, really, we are hiding behind source confidentiality. My sources are unconfirmed sources, or sources from whatever we say out there, to commit serious atrocities to the profession.
Okay.
So basically,
but you haven't answered my question, which was there very little communication? Like, that's an issue that Rose raised. Was there very little communication coming out of State House ahead of the summit?
Yeah, we would have done a lot more, but also the responsibility lies on both sides, because we set the agenda. We actually, on the first day, I remember, we organized a press briefing from CS Macharia, in whose docket SGR resides. And he was very categorical. That was on the Friday before the headlines. And he said that, the issue of the extension of the SGR from Naivasha to Malaba, the financing, was not concretely on the table. And I was part of that press conference. I organized the press briefing. Okay? So what does that tell you? Was this template prepared way before this briefing was done? So in terms of this particular headline, communication was there. And that is why we run a very open communication system. And that's why we embed journalists. And that's why we're open to questions. So if this story was cooking in Nairobi, they would have, whoever was working on the story would have easily picked a phone and called my boss Kanze or called, anyone within government. And let me just, for clarity's sake, the custodian of the president's diary, when he travels out of the country, is the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. Okay? So there are many avenues. So CS Monica, anyone, I don't know of anyone who tried to reach out to any of these people, and they were denied an opportunity to access the president's diary.
Okay, I don't want to speak for Rosaline Obala, but Rosalia, let's get her on phone. Edwin, Obala, can you hear me?
Yes, Olive, I can hear you.
All right, so Temesi tells us that there was, that the seeking out information information runs both ways. You have to seek it out as a journalist, and apart from governments providing us with that information. He seems to, I don't know that used to use the word insinuate, but he claims that no effort was made to reach out to State House or the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, who he says is a custodian of the president's diary. Did you make that effort?
Olive, thank you for bringing me on board. It's good that we have Temesi on board, because he can attest to the information that I tried to reach him. Actually, I talked to him on Saturday after the CS Monica raised issues about the headline. And for his information, I started seeking out information on Wednesday. By Wednesday, only the CS Transport was there and the CS Foreign Affairs. Getting information from them was very difficult. And this issue of SGR, it's not that we are discussing it now when the president was in China. It has been there since last year when the president went for focus. So status will have come out clean to tell us that this time round, as we go for the summit, the Belt and Road, we are not going to discuss SGR. They did not come out to say exactly that. I tried to reach out to the State House spokesperson. She also did not respond. They were reacting on Saturday after the headlines. And if he cared to read about our story, like I'm speaking for the Standard, we had quotes from the CS himself, that is CS Macharia. So it was not anonymous quotes. We were getting quotes directly from the CS. Even if the CS was in China, we took the pain to get and clarify our stories before they were published. So before he shares his frustrations with the media, he needs to have actually read the stories that came out and see, did the media do a background check? Did we try to reach the team that was in China? And for Standard, there was no team that was in China that he's saying that they were able to brief. He actually promised himself to get back to me up to date. I'm still waiting for him to respond on the same.
Okay, so you're saying what he said about quoting unnamed sources is not accurate?
Yes.
That you quoted the CS Transport,
I quoted the CS,
James
yes.
Macharia?
Yes.
All right. Temesi?
I think I have right of reply. And,
yes.
and Rosalind, thank you. Thank you for bringing that up. I think the problem we had with your story is basically on, insinuating that the government was denied this particular loan. And I remember the conversation we had was that we were to do an interview with CS Macharia, and because your media house was not represented in China, for reasons best known to the management of your group, we issued a statement, a State House, okay? And in that story, we highlighted the issues that had been discussed that day. And in those many issues, I think the 3 issues that we highlighted, there was no date, there was no issue of SGR. So we were wondering where else you got this information on SGR. The only aspect of SGR that was in that story was about the signing of an operation and maintenance framework contract for phase 2A, yeah, from Nairobi to Naivasha. And also the CS talking about government plans to see how best they can be able to evacuate containers once they're in Naivasha using the meter gauge railway. So that we can get trucks off the road and make sure that in as much as we are working on the SGR, we have an alternative route for evacuating cargo to the hinterland. So basically the issue of, and I remember your question was about the state, and because where I see it, I facilitate the engagement between government and the press. And so I made sure that the line minister was able to address the press. And because of the media houses that were not represented in that press conference, we did a statement that actually reflected what the CS said.
But do you appreciate what Roselyn Obala is trying to say? Which is, the harder you make it for her to access information, it forces us then to start connecting the dots. Yes. To start filling in the gaps for ourselves. Do you agree with her that perhaps if you provided greater clarity ahead of the summit, then we would not be where we are now?
I agree with her to some extent, but I would also want to say is that, you see, the media cannot set its own agenda and report that agenda, okay? It has to set the agenda together with the aspirations of the people, it's the consumers of its output, and also the people they're reporting about. This agenda of the president traveling to China to get money for the second phase was actually created by the press, and they reported it without really bothering to find out whether it reflects the truth, which should be the cornerstone for journalism, really.
Roselyn, before I let you go, do you have any questions for Temesi?
Yes, I think I have a right to reply. Temesi is talking about the media creating, like he's inserting this was fake news. And this is not the first time we are talking about the extension of SGR from Naivasha to Nairobi. Even in the budget policy statement, it is there. That is not the media, it is the government. Unless they are now disowning their own documents to the public. And two, they owe it to the public, to tell the public, because the issue of SGR is not beginning now. It is a subject that has been discussed from last year, September, when the president was in China for the FOCAN. So by then, they had all these months to come out and clarify and say, whatever narrative the media has been advancing, this is not the case. The issue of SGR has been dropped. They have even told us that during the cabinet meeting on the 18th, the issue of SGR was discussed, but they discussed the meter gauge railway, which was supposed to be used to rehabilitate the old railway. But this information did not come out. We are getting them after our Saturday headlines that they are having issues with. They had the whole week when Raila talked about the issue of SGR on Saturday last week. Surely 1 week was a long time to have come to clarify before going to China and now coming to blame it on the media. And actually, the media is doing a good job, because if they did a story they didn't want, then actually media is doing something, because our work is not to press the government.
All right, thank you, Roselyn. And yeah, thank you for taking part in the conversation. Roselyn Obala co-authored the Saturday story that had the CS Foreign Affairs and the Chief of Staff up in arms. All right, Temesi, in the hot seat. But before I come back to you, Edwin, do you share Roselyn's sentiments?
Yes, I do. I share a lot of those sentiments. And I'm going to say straight to Temesi that he is taking it to another level of now, instead of giving, but after denying or giving little information, now he is misinforming. Because the trip to China to talk about the SGR loan is not a creation of the media. I mean, on 20th of March, a team of Treasury officials and people from Kenya Railways were in Beijing, and we wrote about that story. CS Masharia's voice was in that story, and we said this is paving way for the negotiation. Even earlier, before that, they did an inspection of the 2A, Nairobi Naivasha, and they talked about ongoing discussions to continue the line. And now, as Roselyn said, a few days, about 4 days before they left, I think the last weekend before they left, former Prime Minister Raila Odinga, who by virtue of his handshake, now you know where he stands in the cycle, talked about, I'm going to accompany the president to negotiate for the money so that we bring the railway through Sondu to Kisumu. Now, how do you make that up?
Okay.
Because that's something that was there on the public domain. They went to China, and I dare say, in a new headline, they were denied the loan.
Okay, Temesi, do you still maintain that those headlines had no basis?
It's a good conversation that we are having, and I'm happy that Edwin is saying it's been an ongoing conversation, okay? And that conversation was not to end with this trip of the president to China. I'm saying so because At no one point did government come out and say that now we are going out to China to get the loan that we have been discussing for a very long time. I've just said here that BRF is a multilateral platform. It had over 60 heads of state and government. Okay, it was not about Kenya and China. It was about a worldwide, infrastructure and connectivity project. So what I'm trying to say is that, you cannot attribute, you cannot get statements that were made by people outside of government. Okay, we all know the formal government communication structures, and we know who speaks for the president and who doesn't speak for the president. I think this is, common knowledge. So you cannot say because this has been a conversation that was ongoing, and now that the president is traveling, then they are going to come back with this basket of money for the second phase of the SGR. It is true, the conversations are ongoing. Government has not denied the fact that these conversations are ongoing. Okay, they may
has denied the fact that we've been denied money,
and because we have not been denied money, because there's no evidence. No one has spoken to that fact, to that issue of being denied money.
Edwin, I'll come to you. Let me go to Dr. because Dr. has been nodding vigorously as has been speaking. Yes, Dr. you can come in.
So you see, economists like working with figures. Figures are more factual than maybe stories. First of all, I think my figures are correct. Our total public debt in Kenya is around 5 trillion Kenya shillings. That's around 50 billion US dollars. And of this, half of that, about 2.5 trillion Kenya shillings is domestic. I think the government just borrowed internally within Kenya. And another half of that is external. That is the worrying point now, the external one. About 2.5, that's around $25 billion. And of this external 2.5 trillion Kenya shillings, I think 1 trillion, about 1 trillion is Chinese. That's about 10 billion. For sure, I can tell you, as an economist, I know which many countries have defaulted. The best example is Argentina defaulted around 2001, 2002 there. And these figures as they are right now, especially the external debt, these are not crisis figures. These are not crisis figures. So my expectation, in fact, was this. The media should have focused more on the benefits of the Belt and Road initiative, which the Chinese government has decided. This is an economic program which is going to connect 152 countries of the world. This world has 193 countries. Connecting 152 countries, in fact, virtually you've connected the whole world. Through roads, railway lines, and sea routes. Okay. So I expected the media to have focused more on that than Raila and Uhuru had gone to get a loan for SGR from Naivasha to those are non-issues.
Non-issues to you.
Exactly.
Okay, Rose, I want you to come in at that point. Do you agree with Daktari that perhaps we're so focused on a particular narrative to the exclusion of all other factors?
I think the media goes for what the public is interested in. And right now, there's nothing that concerns public more than the governance of this country. We keep hearing about monies disappearing, projects not properly implemented, etc., etc., etc. We keep hearing about debt being incurred in our name and all these kind of things. And I think we're overlooking one thing that the woman in one of your clips said. We want to participate. It is a right, it's a constitutional requirement that we participate, But the government doesn't seem to think that public's voice counts anywhere, And all these questions come from refusing to engage the public, to explain. Even today, we're talking about the loan, whether it was given or not given. Why won't somebody just come and talk about the loan? This is what happened. This is what we discussed. This is what was not discussed. This is where we're going. End of story. It wouldn't even take 5 minutes. But we go round and round, and the BRF forum, and who, and China, and who, and embedded who, and it doesn't help. It doesn't help. We need some straight communication from our government when we ask a question, when we're not clear, and they must be prepared to speak until we are satisfied we've understood, There seems to be this thing that because it's government, we should be okay. But constitutionally, we reserve the right to run our affairs. In the preamble, we say that. We, the people, We reserve the right to run our own affairs. We are asking for this information. We have a Public Information Act. Nobody respects it. I was watching Waiter, sorry, saying that we can't access the contract. It's our contract. It's made in our name. It's incurred in our name. We will pay it. And you say we can't look at it? Even the media can't look at it? There's a fundamental problem with how we're being governed. And that's why I don't think that it is wrong to focus on the governance issue in this. It preoccupies us. The handshake preoccupies us. You know, what does it mean for us? What does it mean for the running of our country? What does it mean for accountability? These are questions that preoccupy us because we're coming from a history of bad governance. We're trying to put in place the constitutional requirements that will open up processes so that we can be comfortable at home and not just keep reading about billions and billions and billions and billions lost.
Okay. All right, it's quite literally getting hot in here. We'll take a few minutes to fan ourselves as we take this break. Welcome back. You're watching Presspass, and we're discussing several headlines that have dominated this week with regard to the negotiations or lack thereof of negotiations in China to do with the SGR. Now, there's an exchange that Temesi and Edwin were having off camera, and I just want to come to that. Now, we have our business reporter and anchor, Julian Zambuko, who was reading the business news tonight. And he says, I think, the same thing that Edwin, he makes the same point that Edwin is making, which is it is very clear in the 2019 budget policy statement that negotiations have been done. To tell us that we're now going back to the meter gauge railway is to speak from both sides of the mouth. And he highlights a section of the budget policy statement. I think it's section 140, which reads, building on these gains, the government has embarked on the construction of phase 2A, Nairobi to Naivasha of SGR. Already 85% of phase 2A has been done. Further, financing negotiations and detailed designs for the construction of phase 2B, that is Naivasha to Kisumu, have been done. Once phase 2B is completed, it will connect Kisumu City. Basically, the point is negotiations, further financing negotiations and detailed designs for the construction of phase 2B have been done. You're saying negotiations are still going on.
And I want to go back to where Edwin began. And he said, you know, we've always reported a process, okay? We've never reported the ultimate. You know what I mean? Until ink is put to paper and we have something to communicate, we are not going to make that mistake of saying things that are not true. And the truth of the matter is that, you know, the discussions are ongoing, okay? And I'll take you to another achievement that we got in China that has been ongoing for a very long time, the avocado deal, okay? For us to be able to access the 1.4 billion strong market that is China, the discussion has been there for a very long time. So these bilateral engagements, discussions over financing take a long period of time. And that is what Waziri Macharia was saying. That's the same thing that CS Macharia was saying, that, you know, negotiations will continue, but in the process, because now we are almost done with phase 2A that terminates in Naivasha, how do we make use of that line? How do we monetize it? How do we start getting benefits out of that line? First, we need to focus on doing the special economic zone. And then, once we get cargo to Naivasha, how best can we utilize the existing infrastructure? And that's how the discussion of the meter gauge railway came up. It is not a new discussion. I think, for those who were in Mombasa when His Excellency Museveni visited recently, that conversation, he spoke about it. So, and let's remember that SGR is not a Kenyan project. It's not just a Kenyan only project. It's a Belt and Road project. It's a project that affects the region, okay? So these conversations don't you know, focus on Kenya as a single country. So it's a process, and I like that idea of being a process. So at some point that process will be concluded and we will have our SGR going all the way to Kisumu and eventually all the way to Malaba.
Okay.
But as at now, there was no land loan that was rejected. There was no money that the president was denied. What we know is that the process is ongoing.
Okay, Edwin. And before Edwin accuses me of giving you too long rights of reply, Edwin, you were telling to message, do you stand by the Nation headline?
I stand by it tomorrow, the next year, and any other day after. Let me tell you something. I understand their job is very difficult. I mean, look at it this way. You are a parent who has been borrowing from a local stall outside the gate. And you've been feeding your children from the food you borrow from that stall. And then one day you go to that stall and Mama Mboga tells you, I can't give you anymore. And how do you go and tell your children now that, you know, today we are not eating because we are not getting the money, the food we have been borrowing from the stall outside? It's painful. I understand their problem. And if you look at the wording of the CS Ambassador Amina, the SGR was not...
Amina?
Was that... Monica, sorry. Monica said it was never a priority agenda. Very choosy. In fact, Mezi here says it was not concrete on the table. They know what they are doing. They know this was part of it, but they're being cagey with information just to run away from it. This thing is as it is. Even the entire Belt and Road Initiative, as he puts it, where the SGR belongs, is already in trouble. Look at what Ethiopia did. Last year, they had to request for an extension of their loan for another 20 years because they were struggling to pay. And here is the insurer of the loan telling us that they have gone through a loss of $1 billion because of the default or lack of repayment ability from Ethiopia. Ethiopia is our neighbor up here. Now we go back to borrow again and they know what's going on with Ethiopia. They will definitely not lend you. So we can go around and say, oh yeah, we are doing an MGR, meter gauge railway, 40 billion. By the way, who saw it being signed? Was there a 40 billion deal? The only quote we have is the CS Macharia saying, oh, we'll get a 40 billion, revive the meter gauge railway from Naivasha to Malaba. But where is the deal? Who signed any deal of such nature? So it's a nice spin. It's a nice spin, but again, we are going back to where we started, rushing into decisions without doing any feasibilities and even not being sure what's going to happen after that. Okay. In fact, we should be asking whether this railway was meant to go beyond Naivasha in the first place. It's not even in Naivasha.
I think one of the lines that was used in the Nation story was line to nowhere. Railway to nowhere.
Yeah, it ended up in a bush
the other word
somewhere.
that the other phrase that Aggrey Mutambo used was slap in the face. Well, Dr. I want to come in at this point. You were saying, there is no reason for panic in your assessment. Yeah. But let's look at the numbers. And Edwin, I'd like you to back me up on this front. We are making a loss of what? Is it over 700 million monthly?
We are paying over 1 billion to operate the railway.
And we're paying, that means what, 12 billion?
Yeah,
and what we made from the railway line, I think in the last year was 10 million. So we are running at a loss. And yet this year, yes, in June, we are meant to start repaying back that loan. And you still insist, next month, yes, you still insist that there's no reason to panic, that the press is blowing things out of proportion.
Exactly, I still insist. In fact, let me just inform Edwin, one thing which happened in China for the benefit of Ethiopia. I think Ethiopia, all their interests which have accrued up to 2018, they were written off by China when they were in China, when their prime minister was in China last week. So China is not a predatory partner. I think it looks a very, very good partner. But let me talk about the viability of the SGR, about the SGR. The SGR, even the ones China themselves are built in their own country, it requires about 10 years for you to break even. It requires about 10 years, 15 years for you to break even, to start seeing the benefits that you are now repaying the cost of that line. The break-even point 10 to 15 years. So our SGR was just, when was it inaugurated? Commissioned 2016. It's not even 4 years old. It's not even 4 years old. And for sure, the School of Economics was very, very lucky. Some 2 months ago, we were invited through the university, through Kenyatta University. We were invited by the Embassy of China here in Kenya. They were doing a tour of the SGR. In fact, what we realized, this line is not operating at full capacity because cargo is coming from Mombasa to our inland container depot in Athi River. But those containers go empty back to Mombasa. So I think what we need to do is, how can we make use of that SGR at full capacity? Shall we start seeing containers moving from Nairobi to Mombasa also, as exports or whatever? Then we shall start talking about whether this project was viable or not. But for now,
then my question to you is
it's very premature.
Shouldn't we have taken all that into consideration before we committed ourselves?
I think I'll jump in at this point. And what Daktari is simply saying is that this is an investment for posterity. Okay? We are looking at a project that government has invested. Let's look at what we are replacing. 110-year-old line, okay? Nobody has ever done the numbers of how much that line has given to the economy. I think we are being narrow in looking at a line that is less than 4 years and hoping that unless we optimize it, we will be able to start making money. This is a public good. My little economics tells me it's a public good. We are not setting up for tomorrow. So when the ministry talks about optimizing the line, making sure that the line is able to generate more wealth through cargo and special economic zones and all those things that are being done, we are looking at the long-term returns for this line. And anywhere in the world, I think Dr. would agree with me that such projects, okay, usually have a period. And I mean, not know for sure, but he talks about 15 to 20 years. So I think putting SGR on the cross at this point in time is premature.
It's too early.
Okay, Rose, are you convinced?
I don't think, first of all, I don't know why, when media asks questions, it's not about crucifying you. It's about getting information for the public. Yes. And we just need straight answers. And that, I think, is what is missing, you know. I don't think many Kenyans think that it's not a good thing to have this railway line, you know. I don't think it's not, we don't want to move into the new era and modernize and whatever. But we have questions. Yes. Is it worth our money? Is it going to return? What is the return going to be? I mean, Daktari is talking about whatever containers going back empty. It's actually, I think, points to our production, you know, which has gone down. Exactly. We've become a consuming nation. Yes. So these are conversations which we should have. But I mean, for you to constantly hit back at the media and say like, you know, crucify, it's not crucifixion to ask questions. Mm-hmm. I think the engine of Kenya's development has actually been the media asking tough questions all the time and not letting one single thing go by, you know? And I don't think that they should ever stop. I actually don't think they should stop.
All right. We're discussing the viability, and I just want to read something that was written by Paul Wafula, and that ran in the Saturday Nation. I don't know whether you had a chance to read it, any of you. But these are his very first lines, and he says, the very first feasibility study done before Kenya went to China to look for funds to build a modern railway returned a disturbing verdict. It found that the standard gauge railway would not be a financially viable project unless a miracle happened. Not my words, his words. The miracle would include the country growing its import bill more than twice its projected pace. It would also need that everything imported in the country must use the railway. It also required the rest of the region to play ball and build similar lines connecting to Kenya. And lastly, Kenya had to quickly find enough cargo to fill the train to be taken to the coast by the time it started operating. And even after this, there would still be doubts on its bankability. So Temesi and Daktari, you're both telling us, be patient. This is a project for posterity. This is a man, Paul Wafula, who is saying it would take, the very first feasibility study showed that it would take a miracle for this project to be viable. Edwin.
I read a reaction to that feasibility when Kenya Railways responded to that feasibility. The feasibility was actually done by the Chinese themselves. There was the Kenyan side that was doing their feasibility, and it was stopped midway. If you look at the story I wrote on January 13th about the contract we signed with China, that's what happened. But we are also not saying SGR is a bad project. In fact, it can be made a viable project. But how do we make it viable? First, we don't even know the exact amount we are paying to bear that burden of that train moving from Mombasa to Nairobi. Now, we don't know. I fear it is more than that, probably twice. Secondly, why was it very difficult to just do the railway and give it to Kenya Railways to operate? We will not have to pay someone to run a railway, which is returning empty containers. By the way, even if we wanted to make it viable as fast as you are saying, we are taking it, like we are giving it a critique when it is still too young. Kenya Railways running the SGR will only mean that we run optimally. We have this number of containers coming in. Let's have this number of wagons and trains and run as that. And we make an operational profit out of it. But here is a contract which says, we've built the railway. By the builder is the operator. I'm going to operate it for 10 years. This is what you will pay me per month, depending on this specific number of trains, whether you have cargo or not. I mean, surely. Don't blame us when we critique this. And I need also to correct you on the borrowings. We are now on domestic at 2.6 trillion. Yeah. And on external, we are hitting 2.7 trillion. That is as at last year. So you don't wait for thieves to get into your house, then you start screaming. When they're at the fence, when you see them jumping over the fence, you blow the whistle straight away.
Okay.
And don't blame us for blowing the whistle.
All right, so Messi. First of all, my first question to you is, what Rose put across to you? First of all, do you agree that the media has every right to ask these questions?
Absolutely. I think we like it when you ask questions, and we like it when we are able to provide convincing answers. And I think some of the questions that are being asked here, either CS Macharia or Chief of Staff, when he gave an interview to a media house yesterday, alluded to some of this and actually responded to some of these questions. But basically what you're saying is that, you know, SGR is not just the line, okay? It's not just the investment that we put into the line. There was a bigger plan, and that is what Wafula is referring to in his article, and is what he's calling miracles. I don't want to call them miracles, but it's a projection. It's actually worked out. The numbers have been worked out. So whatever he calls a miracle, that is journalist. That's the language of the newspapers. But in real sense, and what the CS was saying, and I was present at that press conference, is that we need to optimize the line this far, okay? So that as we go into the future, we are very sure that we will be able to pay for this line, and Kenyans can start seeing the fruits of the line. But let me also tell you something. Sometimes the social good may supersede the fine numbers, in the sense that, for instance, look at what it has done to domestic tourism. Okay, how much people the line has, you know, the one from Nairobi to Mombasa, how many people it has pushed in the few years that it's been in existence. How many tourists, local tourists, are going to the coast, and the packages that we keep seeing coming up based on the SGR. Basically, this is a project that is transforming lives. If you use that line, the number of businesses that have opened up along that line, you know, you may not be able to quantify, okay? And that is why you say, when you have an interview that takes care of the whole country, and some of these respondents have not felt the SGR, then it may misrepresent, okay? I'm sure if you took a ride on that line and made stopovers, either for people who run businesses or for people who are doing business on that line, they will tell you it has transformed lives. And that is why it is a dream and it's a plan for government that this line cuts across the country, so that the entire country can be able to feel, you know, the benefits of this line. The travel time has been cut, you know, people are spending less than they used to spend driving to Mombasa and all those kinds of things. So there are things that we may not be able to put in real numbers like Edwin wants, or, you know, the economics wants, but really, generally, if you did a social survey, Kenyans are feeling the SGR.
Daktari, I want you to come in at that point. My question to you is this. Do you think the headlines that came out of this summit were informed by the fact that perhaps Kenyans, given we've been banned several times before, are by nature a very suspicious people? This is, I think, is the biggest infrastructure project we've embarked on as a country. Do you think that's part of the reason that we are very suspicious, or we are very keen and keen to look at the numbers and the details as far as this contract is concerned?
I think Kenyans are not suspicious people, but I think, as you even mentioned earlier, I think they lack information. Kenyans don't get the right information on these projects which the government is undertaking. Let me say this again on the SGR. You see, this country has very, very good programs and targets. For example, our Vision 2030, we are targeting to be growing at 10% per year, our GDP to be growing at 10% per year. We have not achieved that. That day we shall achieve that, I can assure you. That SGR will need even more than one. We'll need several. We have the Big 4 program, manufacturing. Probably we shall be manufacturing. Our target is to manufacture. We want to increase our manufacturing from the current 8% of the GDP to, say, 15%, 15% or 20%.
Okay,
if we achieve,
what are you trying to say?
What I'm trying to say is this: if we achieve these targets, which we have set for ourselves, I can assure you, in fact, that SGR will not be enough. We'll need even more.
Okay, so what are you saying as far as the media coverage around the SGR is concerned?
No, it's a whole issue of lack of information or facts provided properly, probably by Temesi and the rest.
You're half shaking your head, half nodding your head. You're not quite sure what your reaction to that should be.
The truth of the matter is that the media missed this story by far, because And we all agree that SGR has many components. For instance, and that's why CS Monica said it was not a priority agenda, okay? But SGR was on agenda. The part of the SGR that was on the agenda was the signing of the agreement, the operation and maintenance agreement for phase 2A, okay? And that was finalized and signed, okay? That is important because, okay, the line will be ready. It will be commissioned. So what happens? So that's pretty clear. The other thing that happened, which I think the media also missed because they had this template that they needed to fulfill, I don't know from where, is the fact that the president spent his time in China to meet business people. Yeah? We had a business forum, which is a tradition when we travel out of the country to try and attract foreign direct investments. And one of the things that the president did and was very passionate about is to invite Chinese investors to come and view the special economic zone in Naivasha as part of the robust government plan to optimize the SGR. So basically, we had this story to push, but if you look at the dispatch from PSU, yeah, there were a lot of interesting things like the expressway, you know, which a discussion that has been going on for years, yeah, that was actually envisioned during President Moi's time, I think, and then the discussion began during President Kenyatta's time, yeah. So there are very good stories that came out of China, but because we set our own agenda as a media and responded to it, and then Kenyans missed the opportunity to have access to all these good things that came out of this trip.
Okay, Rose. So you spoke about what White said on a different station yesterday, was it?
Yeah.
And so we have Laban Cliff Onserio, who's the Deputy Communications Director, the President's Delivery Unit, and he provides this clarity. He says White's comment was clear. The President was counseled by the Attorney General that the contract can only be accessed through a public audit process, and that can only be done through the Parliamentary Public Accounts Committee. Even if he wanted to, he couldn't. The law does not allow him to. Public can access any document through the Parliamentary Public Accounts Committee. My question to you, Temesi, is that shouldn't the President have known that? At the time he was making a commitment to release the contract to Mark Masai.
It's not that the contract cannot be accessed. It's just the mechanism of access. And we are a representative democracy. Let's just not forget where, you know, we have structures, okay? And the Public Accounts Committee of Parliament represents Kenyans, okay? Those are elected members of Parliament. So what simply put is that it's accessible, but there are limits as to who can be able to access this document. And that's what the Chief of Staff was simply saying. So when the President says that this document is available, he was right, because this document is actually available. And it's the same thing that the Chief of Staff confirmed yesterday. So I don't see any contradiction.
Let's be honest. Temesi, I'll quote Edwin and tell him I understand the position you're in. But we all watched that interview. It was broadcast nationally, and he said he would make the contract available to Mark Masai. There was nothing mentioned about the Public Accounts Committee. Yes, Edwin.
I called Temesi's boss when I was doing my story, and she told me, no problem. We'll even circulate it this weekend to all media houses. It is quoted in the story. I tell you, these pins are very hard to make, and it's not easy job. I understand you.
We keep getting back to the issue of communication. How do you communicate to us? Because, I mean, initially, when you say, yes, I'll make it available, and then you say, no, it's not available, you know, and the wording used was, no, you cannot access it. You know, it wasn't like, yes, you can access it, but we have to give it to you through this process, you know. It was like, no, you cannot access it, you know. So, I mean, I think government needs to clean up its communication and understand that it's the priority of government to talk to its people and tell them what it's doing and how and why, long before the SGR comes.
Or just tell them when you are not going to tell them anyway.
Yes, tell them that you're not going to tell them.
And you know, when Temes was speaking, he said what was signed was an operational contract for 2B, 2A, yes. Nairobi, Naivasha. That's breaking news. Government signs a new operation contract. We have one more secret to start hunting for, and it's going to take long. just as you see what's going on.
Okay.
So we have this secret to start hunting for again.
Yeah.
But all in all, and I'm sure you're getting this feedback that information access is a problem, transparency is an issue. When something is covered beyond a curtain, you probably struggle to get it, and when you get it, you put it the way it is. So this one on the phase between Naivasha and Kisumu, and you remember we had a plan to build a port, a 14 billion port at Kisumu. Now we are talking about a meter gauge railway between Naivasha to Malaba. It's like connecting a 16-inch pipe and a 2-inch pipe and saying, yeah, we had a bigger pipe, but now we have a problem. We are going to put that small pipe and then move on. By the way, that railway has not been operating for a while. There is encroachment, there is everything that has happened. Some of them have become market. I was home the other day, and a former railway station is now a bar. People are drinking where the station master used to sit. So things have happened, and you really have to take a long journey to do that. And look at it this way. When the SGR was done before, the argument was, why don't we revive the old railway and then just spend little money, like say 100 billion, and we'll be having a railway anyway. That was dismissed. We used a lot of money to acquire new land, 30 billion, and build a railway of 327 billion. So using 40 billion where we were going to beg for 368 billion just tells you that we could have done it the same way before.
Okay. Do you get where he's coming from, Daktari, where Edwin is coming from? Because he says, you know, now that we have to bridge that gap between Naivasha and Malaba, then the meter gauge railway is good enough. Why was it not good enough before then?
Yeah, you see, in Kenya, the need for infrastructure is not in doubt. There's so much need, whether roads, railway, or even that is there. I think I want to explain the issue of viability of the SGR. I can tell you it is a viable project, and especially if this country will be meeting its targets, which it has set for itself. Definitely the results will clearly show. It's not about what Wafula was saying about miracles. It will be factual. Once we start meeting or behaving in the right way to meet the targets we have set for ourselves. And again,
Dr. Nzai, it seems you're a man of faith.
And again, this meeting in China last week, I've told you, it's a connectivity of the whole world through railway lines, through roads, through sea routes. We shall be seeing more infrastructural projects, not only the whole of Africa. We shall be seeing them, the whole world.
Right,
so I'm very, very sure, even this Naivasha, Kisumu, even if our president and Raila missed it, but it will come, because that's the idea of the whole Belt and Road initiatives, to connect.
Man of faith right there. But I want to start making our concluding remarks. Okay. Edwin, there is a point that was made by Temesi, and he said these are named sources. Could there be some improvement to the way we run our stories? Do we rely too much on barroom talk?
Yes.
This is how unnamed sources come in. 1, the official source is quiet. 2, the unnamed source is not sure whether they are allowed to speak, even when they are within government. 3, it has been made such a secret that you are not supposed to talk about it. By the way, my first role is to protect a source. If I talk to Daktari here and he talks about something that as an economist and he makes his own opinion and he has a feeling that he is not supposed to be quoted, I'm his first line of defense. There's no way I'll just set him up because I want to put a face to the quote anyway. So it's not a new thing to say my source who did not want to be named for 2, 3, 1 reason.
But you are required to make that information available to your editor. Yes,
of
correct?
course, when they want it. That is when they want it, and when they probably, because they also understand, you know, you are a journalist first. We are not cooking information. It's something that has been backed up to some level. You take notes. We don't record sources without informing them, but we take notes.
Okay, a source comes to you, they give you this information. Do you take another step and verify the information?
And sometimes we take so long to verify. And that's why we try to reach the official sources. And when they go quiet, what do? We have a duty to inform the public. And by the way, we also know how to see what is extreme. Because if a source tells you he saw a senior person running naked, you can't write that, you know. But do you want me to make my concluding remarks? Please. This argument about the SGR loan having not been granted or granted is neither here nor there. Last year in October, Kenya had already made a similar attempt, and they were sent back to go and do a feasibility study for the railway that is already running. That's public information. Now, these are the odds that fell our team when they went to China. Because, one, you see, when they were negotiating Mombasa-Nairobi, there was no SGR. So it was feasibility, numbers, projections. Now there's an SGR. So we know how much is coming through the port, we know how much it's making, we know how much loss is there. And now when you want financing for the next phase, you've got to prove that it's working. So that's plain, and we cannot run away from that. Sinosure, the insurance, the government insurer from the Chinese government already raised an issue with some of these projects in Africa, including the Ethiopian one. That's a government agency advising the Exim Bank, which is also a government agency, that look, some things are not going on well. Kenya could have fallen into that same problem. So even the first feasibility that put doubt on the bankability of this project, whether it was bankable, still is still haunting us even today. Okay. And finally, this avocado deal that they're telling us about, it's not adding up. Like, it's not helping us. We want a rich Jerry telling us about
okay, all right, Edwin, so that's a story for another day. But Rose, given what Temesi has had to say, what Edwin has had to say, what we heard from Roselyn Obala, do you think there is reason, or is there cause for the media to apologize for those headlines it carried on Saturday?
Absolutely not. I think the media has actually, I mean, people forget that information, the media doesn't sit in here and just cook up information. Kenyans bring information to the media, you know? And like Edwin was saying, some of them say, I can't give you this on the record, etc., etc., etc. And it is up to us to push the envelope. If we had to wait for the sources, you know, to come to us, half the time Kenya, they don't want to speak, they don't want to be open. Kenya would not be where it is. We would not have our new constitution. We would still be in an authoritarian sort of state. You know, it's the duty of the media to push the questions until we get answers. And sometimes it means publish and wait for them to respond.
Okay.
It's really very important. And I think I just want to finish by saying we focus so much on infrastructure. It really bothers me that we forget the people. It's all about serving the people. And I think I really want to see some sort of shift where there's some compassion for the people who are going to pay this thing, you know? The least you can do is give them the information, the very least.
Okay, Temesi, do you maintain at the conclusion of this conversation that the headlines were strange, disappointing, and misleading?
Totally. In fact, the media failed Kenyans. They failed their own country, I think, on this one. Because this loan was not on the table. They reported it as they, you know, as they reported it. And what does that tell us about we as a people? Because we are Kenyans first, before we become journalists, before we become whatever that we are. And we owe it to this country that, you know, if this country does well, we will do well. And it's sometimes, you know, it's not just about hard-hitting headlines. It's not about headlines. Kenyans don't eat headlines, okay? Kenyans want to grow their avocados and sell them at a premium, eh? And they want to go to Naivasha and be able to, you know, do jobs in those special economic zones. So for this one, I think, you know, the country was failed. But most importantly, I think the events of this weekend tells us something about our state as a media. I think we appreciate that the environment has really changed. And we as mainstream media are competing with social media, okay, for for breaking news and all those things. But let's not forget that we have a responsibility that's bigger than social media.
Okay.
You see, our credibility should be higher than social media. So we must choose between being mainstream or going gutter, or going social media and being out there.
Doctor, we'll come back to you. But speaking of social media, as Sri Lanka's capital, Colombo, slowly settles back into a sense of normalcy with traffic returning to the roads that had been deserted after the Easter Sunday bombings, a complex debate has ensued on the government's decision to shut down social media use in the country. Was it necessary, and did it work? Our producer Rosalia Wangoi with that report.
The Sri Lankan government quickly did what many governments now do in times of crisis. It cited the threat of misinformation and temporarily shut down social media. Within 6 hours of the coordinated blast across Sri Lanka, allegedly by a local group that had pledged allegiances to the Islamic State of Iraq and the Levant, the social media shutdown came into effect. Beyond the question of whether a social media blockage is in the societal interest is the question of how effective blockages are. The evidence suggests shutting off social media does little to check the spread of misinformation, particularly in a tech-savvy country like Sri Lanka, where the use of virtual private networks is widespread. With the accessibility of virtual private networks, it is easy for anyone to bypass censorship and access geographically blocked content on the internet from anywhere. Between 2005 and 2015, journalists in Sri Lanka faced heavy government pressure, and some paid for their work with their lives. In 2009, Reporters Without Borders directly blamed the president and state-owned media for inciting hatred and violence against journalists. That's why more and more Sri Lankans turn to social media to access information. Sri Lanka's president says the social media blockage will continue since there is still too much misinformation out there, and if the platforms fail to control it, they may be banned completely. Under the declared state of emergency, the government also has the power to censor mainstream news outlets. Far from seeing the end of misinformation, Sri Lankans have been left with a lack of information. It is not the first time social media has come under siege on a national level. In March this year, a gunman opened fire in a mosque in Christchurch, New Zealand, killing 50 people and injuring 50 more. As he did so, he filmed the entire crime and streamed it live on Facebook.
That report by Rosalia. Thank you very much for that report, Rosalia. And so many, a lot of feedback basically on our conversation today. Claim Buganda, for example, tells me to tell you, Temesi, that please remind that State House chap that there is Freedom of Information Access Act. So this idea about PAC won't work. That's a conversation we will take forward tomorrow. Unfortunately, we do have to bring...